for the next 3 years, our GDP is projected to average about 1.8% by the National Treasury, which is the lowest figure ever put on paper by the National Treasury since 2005.
Hello, David Ansari here from the Centre for Risk Analysis. South Africa is enduring a decline in investment in the country. Why is this? Well, in this extract from an exclusive client webinar, CRA Senior Analyst Bheki Mahlobo outlines the reasons for the investment drought.
As a proportion of GDP from 1994 until 2021. And what we see here, and if you're familiar with our work, there's a great story that we greatly emphasize at the CRA, and that's the early decade of South Africa's democracy. And from an investment perspective, what we see here is that we saw investment increase from 15% as a proportion of GDP in 1994 until 22% in 2009, the peak since 1994. Now, after the ANC Polokwane conference, which ejected Thabo Mbeki, and with him, much of the pragmatism which the country saw in the first decade, as EWC became the main policy objective after 2008, we saw a decline in investment level from 22% all the way down to 13% in 2021. And this is far below the target of government set by the NDP at 30%. And the current figure that you see on your screen here is about 17 percentage points below that target. In fact, the ANC themselves have now given up on reaching that target in the year 2030. Now, why is investment so important for a country like South Africa? Well, we find our answer by having a look at real GDP as well as investment as a proportion of GDP from 1994 until 2022. You read real GDP on your left-hand axis, and what you see here is that South Africa over the past decade has seen economic stagnation, where the country has really struggled to see economic growth surpass 2%. In fact, for the next 3 years, our GDP is projected to average about 1.8% by the National Treasury, which is the lowest figure ever put on paper by the National Treasury since 2005. When I overlay this data, GDP economic performance, which is really reflective of living standards of the country, with investment levels, we see a very interesting pattern here, where we start off in 1994, as you see an increase in investment levels in the country that is accompanied by an increase in economic performance. And this does make sense. A country like South Africa needs to attract as much investment as possible. And in the early decade, this is exactly what was achieved under pragmatism. The early administration laid the groundwork, laid the foundation for entrepreneurs and businesses to therefore lay bricks on that foundation, build up businesses, become more productive, and hire more people. You can look at this when looking at employment numbers in those early 10 years, as you see a doubling of employment numbers, as well as an increase in living standards. Subsequent to that period, over the past decade, where we've seen hostile policies such as EWC, as well as rigid labor market policies, we've seen a decline in investment levels and accompanied by it, a massive decline in economic performance in the country. The hostile policy environment that the country faces currently has weakened that foundation. Now that foundation has cracks, which can be seen as the cracks of those buildings, by those firms, causing the collapse of businesses, as well as the retrenchment of workers and decline in investment levels in the country. And when looking at the year-on-year percentage change, what we find here is also quite interesting. We're seeing that in the early 2000s, we see annual change in investment levels as high as 14%, and now a dramatic decline of about 15% for the year 2020, and a slight recovery of 2% for the year 2021. Now, an economic recovery is fundamentally underpinned by a recovery in fixed investment levels. And if you do not see that, then unfortunately, you will not see a recovery in economic output in the country. And who's the biggest contributor to investment in the country? Well, it is that of the private sector, which is exactly what we gauge here by looking at investment type by the type of investor from 1970 until 2021. You can see the private sector as the red bar graphs, the public sector as the orange bar graphs, as well as the total as the black line that you can see from your left-hand side all the way until your right-hand side. And you can see here that majority of investments come from the private sector. And these are the people that you need to incentivize in order to invest in your country. If you do not do so, then unfortunately they follow the same path as water on a river, which follows the path of least resistance. And unfortunately, once you start to put up barriers, once you start to put up those resistance, then that water flows elsewhere. And in terms of investment, we've seen that follow the developed world as well as that of emerging markets. Now, this is going to be truly unfortunate for the country, as this will result in a decline in economic performance as well as a decline in living standards, especially looking at our recent unemployment numbers as of 2 days ago, which is still the highest compared to 183 countries. Never seen these high unemployment levels have never been seen in other democratic countries. In fact, in such areas, rural areas such as the Eastern Cape, having a high unemployment rate of about 52%, which is absolutely dire for that province, as well as that of the country. Just to touch on key risks that we see coming ahead, we believe that fixed investments will continue to decline in the country, largely due to the main policies by the ruling government, which are hostile to investors, such as EWC, a rigid labor market, and no signs of those policies being absolutely scrapped, meaning that we're going to still continue to see a decline in investment levels. That will result in economic performance in the country to greatly decline. And this is in a context where 12.4 million South Africans are without a job, which carries with it huge social and political risks. South Africa will therefore be quite vulnerable to capital outflows as the country is weak economically. This has led South Africa to rely on other outside factors such as the commodity rally, which Chris will touch on. The effects of this will also be felt on the government fiscus, as the saving grace may therefore come closing down, as the commodity rally may then also close down, meaning that debt servicing costs will continue to increase, the budget deficit will run deeper and deeper, resulting in the government to spend less on the more important items like education, like healthcare, which will be severely negatively impact poor households in the country.
Thanks for watching. If you would like to access the full recording of this exclusive client webinar, you can do so by one of two ways. The first is becoming a member of the channel for under 100 Rand per month. The second is by becoming a client of the CRA. You can join us on our individual subscription category. That's 290 Rand per month. My name is David Ansara. This is the CRA. Until next time, take care.